Hello and welcome to the Superhero Show. I'm Daniel, this is Chris, and we've listened to you for a change. You asked us to wait a week until the film had been out and then talk about Days of Future Past, which we're going to do now. Obviously, spoiler warnings, that's kind of implicit. So we're going to focus on what you thought of the film and discuss around those points.
Yeah, I think this is the most feedback we've had in the history of the show. Pages of the stuff.
Just reams. A lot of it unintelligible, I'm going to be honest. So
some positive, some negative.
Yeah, I think we're going to go on to them. But first off, I think overwhelmingly positive. You seem to love it. Like, in the weeks leading up to it coming out on this very show, you and I were quite mixed and quite...
Bit sceptical.
Trepidatious, but...
As we addressed, those Empire covers worried us, but...
There was no need to be.
No.
It's great. And so I just thought I'd kick off with a really positive note with William Medley, which is a really nice surname. He says, Days of Future Past is a remarkable film and the best superhero movie of all time. Calm down.
Wow.
Some people may still argue that the X-Men should be at Marvel Studios, but after this film, I think those people are wrong. X-Men Days of Future Past is a remarkable movie that only gets better the more times you see it.
I wonder how many times William has seen it.
And the more times you think about it.
Ooh.
And that's what we're going to do right now.
Yeah. I saw it twice. I saw it twice in a day.
You did?
That was big.
That was the best day you've ever had at work.
And in between, I interviewed the screenwriter, so that was quite interesting. He told me that he thought I was mad seeing it twice. He said, not even I would do that, and I wrote it. No, and I enjoyed it just as much, if not more, the second time. But equally,
wine.
I would disagree with the statement that the more you see it, the more you think about it, the more you like it. Because the more you think about it, potentially, the more it unravels.
Shall we get on to that now?
Yeah, why not?
In true British fashion, let's focus on the negatives right up top.
Well, no, let's build them up to knock them down. Yes, that's what we do in the UK.
Okay. So the first thing is Chris Whitley. Chris Whitley says, do you think the series has taken on too many characters? I understand these films are ensemble pieces, but for me there were one too many characters with little to do in this one. I'm also not a fan of how several mutants from First Class were arbitrarily written out of this plot, almost as if to make space. So that happens with quite a few of the First Class.
Yep.
A lot of them are killed off.
Yep.
Like Emma Frost, Azazel, like the bad guys. Havoc is pretty much just a cameo in the Vietnam War. So this was the thing we were worried about beforehand. Too many characters. Do you think there are too many characters? Do you think some get shortchanged?
I think that's interesting what they've done with these two films. I feel like they're dipping their toe in the water with some of these characters.
Yeah.
And they did it in First Class. Some proved popular, some didn't. And so they've thrown them by the wayside.
Like, do you think anyone's really lamenting the loss of Banshee?
No. No, agreed. And similarly here, it feels like they've dipped their toe in with certain characters, particularly the one we'll talk about a bit later is Quicksilver.
Yeah. Where
actually, now you've seen the film, you kind of wish he was in it more.
It's almost like a screen test, isn't it? Like,
yeah, and spoke to the screenwriter about that specifically, and he's like, yeah, we introduced him here with the idea that he'd have more of a part in Apocalypse, but now with getting reactions about the movie, we know we need to use him a lot more in Apocalypse, so I think it's making them think twice. But
because what you're doing, you're kind of clashing two series together, even though they have the overarching X-Men brand.
Yeah.
And this is what Adrian Hoyland says. It says, couldn't we just gone from First Class again? Mm-hmm. Don't get me wrong, it's a good movie, but I'm not sure we need Bryan Singer at all. I think that seems a little bit harsh. Like, it definitely feels like Bryan Singer's also brought something to this movie as well. It's not like, I don't think you watched and go, oh, I wish Matthew Vaughn was doing this. And it was just the kind of 70s storyline.
Yeah, Bryan Singer's made two fantastic X-Men movies.
Yeah.
We had one bad one, then we had a good one from Matthew Vaughn, and now to have Singer back, it's kind of, I don't know, when they lost Vaughn, what were they going to do? I think it was kind of putting the ship back on course, if you know what I mean.
I think in retrospect, what it looks like is Vaughn kind of reinvigorated the series, and bringing Singer back has kind of unified, and we'll get on to the ending because there's so much to talk about there.
Yeah.
It's kind of unified the bigger X-Men like universe. It almost like makes them feel like a bigger cinematic series that I don't think it would have done if it was just like, those were the old films, those were the new films. It's really just brought it together, and I feel Singer was the right person to do that.
Yeah.
For sentimental reasons, but also in this, he's still directed a great action sequence.
Most definitely. And they could have just continued with the First Class cast and gone straight into the 80s and the 90s and whatever, like the plan was. But who doesn't want to see, the old and young combine a little bit? That's what's exciting about going to see this movie. I mean, I was just disappointed I didn't get to see Fassbender and McKellen get to square off against each other and act opposite each other.
Yeah, I think one of the things that people do, like, you've got to make time. I can totally get behind cutting Anna Paquin's Rogue. I never really liked the rendition of Rogue that they had in the movies. I think McKellen is probably the biggest loss from this movie.
Yeah, he's on the sidelines commentating almost, isn't he?
Yeah.
But still getting and also McKellen and Stewart aren't getting any younger. There's not going to be too many more opportunities to have the cast meet up and through a time travel movie. So I think that was part of the reason to do this film was to
could get everyone on board at this point. Singer was probably the guy who could get everyone to sign on board.
Yeah. And we love both casts, so it was just exciting. I think this is an interesting one, though, from Julian, who says, one flaw I saw in the film was the characters in the future. Although their powers, especially Blink, were displayed magnificently, do you think they developed those characters enough? Definitely not. That was a problem I had with the film. To the point that, if you weren't really up on your comic knowledge, you wouldn't know who they were or what their powers were. No one is introduced.
Yeah,
I understand, they're just dropping things people in and out like you would do in a comic, but you could be quite confused watching that scene if you don't know who they are.
So who do we have in the future sequences that we already know? We have Bobby Drake, we have Colossus, we have Kitty Pryde, obviously Xavier, Wolverine, and Magneto. I almost feel, and Storm, they would probably carry more emotional clout seeing them besieged than introducing new characters, unfamiliar characters, and then putting them in peril. To introduce new characters, you're either setting them up for the future, just to seed them as characters, like we were saying, or you want to show off some new powers. And I think that's why.
And also a means to an end. They were a means to an end to propel the plot, because specific powers that these characters had enable things to happen that propelled the film forward. But no, they could have done with a little more introduction. I just felt like I had no context for some of them.
But then we get into the whole thing,
of course,
the pacing goes off. So it's kind of one of those necessary evils. I think you have to truncate it there just to make it work.
I don't think it was ideal, but I don't want to spend the whole movie with Blink when I want to get to Magneto and
Dinklage. You show me Dinklage. That's what you kept saying.
Show me your Trask.
Yeah. So. Good. So moving on to Trask, and this is going to be quite a good section, I think, quite a meaty section, this is always going to happen with time travel movies.
Yeah.
Inconsistencies.
Yeah.
Now, you create loads of kind of wormholes and parallel universes, and it's going to get really messy. Adam Daniels writes and he says, I really love Days of Future Past, but I had one thing I couldn't stop wondering about. In the original X-Men films, the timeline was that Trask was assassinated and the Sentinels were built. So during the events of X-Men X2 and X3, why were there no Sentinels? Why would they wait 50 years to take over and dominate planet Earth?
I don't really know how to answer that.
It's almost like they hadn't really scripted this film.
It's almost like
I'm
they
really
didn't have they haven't had a larger plan in place in the way that Marvel has.
Yeah.
And so with these movies, they make it up as they go along, as they have done with comics for the history of comic books.
Yeah. And I think in this section we're going to talk about some inconsistencies that are kind of worth addressing, that they probably could have been a bit more respectful for or have worked out a way of incorporating. But I think some of them you just have to go with it. For this to happen, not everything is going to be nice and neat and aligned.
I think there was more suspension of disbelief required for this film than almost any superhero film I've liked.
Yeah.
And it was a film that, in spite of its plot holes and inconsistencies, I'd enjoyed, because it was just so much fun to watch. But I agree, we can go through a lot of these here, and there are big...
You can pull it to parts, but I don't think any of them are really insurmountable to your enjoyment.
Also, all the way through this series, we have actually suspended disbelief. Characters have popped in and out, different actors, they've had different, mutants have had different powers, the same mutant. It's
you know what I thought has gone down brilliantly well, that I was kind of, maybe if the film wasn't so good, they'd be more resistant to it, is Beast being able to transform by his rage or his serum.
Yeah.
Nobody has really latched onto that as a big kind of oh, why have you done that? It kind of just works. To me it felt a bit like one of those easy things to throw in a script. Oh, we've got a serum. Yeah. Therefore, we can bring Beast back to how we had him before, and we can have Charles back to how we had him before. It's a bit of those easy things to throw into a script. Yeah. Do you not think that works, actually?
It's okay, because it gives the characters the kind of internal issue that they need.
I think it's an absolute necessity as well for Xavier, because if he's not suppressing his powers, the whole situation is just instantly resolvable.
Yeah.
And you have to deprive him of his powers, because his powers are so powerful. And if the whole plot is stopping someone doing something, his power can do just that. So
is that why Quicksilver disappears quite quickly into proceedings.
He'd be really handy. Just keep him around, like
just on this White House lawn. Surely he could actually sort this out.
Has he not passed the test? What do you have to do to get in? Do you have to sit the 11+ to get into Xavier's school?
He's watching it on the telly with his little sister
playing Pong with Scarlet Witch.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, carry on. Sorry. Where were we?
Should we get on to Ian's?
Yes.
Ian's got lots of beefs.
Right. What are Ian's beefs then?
He's basically going, I love the first movie, but there's too many inconsistencies for Ian. He's having a right nightmare. Not a peep. Inconsistencies with X-Men's Origins Wolverine, all the stuff with Stryker, inconsistencies with the Wolverine, and the inconsistencies with X-Men 3, The Last Stand.
Yeah.
There's too many to go through in detail, sorry Ian, but I think the ones with X3, The Last Stand, are kind of the most interesting. So obviously Professor X gets killed. He gets vaporized by Jean Grey, Dark Phoenix. At the end of X3, The Last Stand, there's a post-credit sequence where he's kind of transferred his consciousness, it's implied. But we've never really found out how he's like resumed bodily form. No,
he's in. I'm trying to remember that he's in a sick bed, isn't he? And we hear Patrick Stewart's voice
through Moira McTaggart.
Through Moira McTaggart, but not the Moira McTaggart that we know from X-Men First Class.
No.
Because Olivia Williams, isn't it?
Yes.
Is that, and it's Rose Byrne in the movie.
Yeah.
But there's no suggestion that it's
like your face just sounds
thinking really hard. There's no suggestion that it's Patrick Stewart's body he's actually in, or is there?
No, but I mean, he's talking about in the beginning of Days of Future Past.
Yeah.
How's he?
That's what I mean.
That's the problem. Yeah, there's no suggestion that we don't know how he's back, basically. Where's he got his body back from? So I think that's quite a decent point. And I think a lot of these kind of inconsistencies around the ending.
Why is he in a wheelchair?
It's almost the whole thing. You could interpret it as a way of expunging The Last Stand.
Definitely. And Simon Kinberg, the screenwriter, I'll keep coming back to this because we talked about a lot of interesting things that not all of it's made it onto the site. But I asked him about that, about the fact that this is a reset. And he said, it really is. Sorry, we're going to get onto that. But the point was, he wouldn't have done it unless he was working with Bryan Singer, who had done X1 and 2.
Yeah.
So you get a sense that even though Singer kind of produced X-Men 3, it wasn't his baby, and it wasn't a great movie, and obviously characters that we love were killed off. Although I'm sure he would have okayed those.
Well, he was attached to direct for some period.
He was, yeah, before Vaughn.
So it's not like it happened in a vacuum.
He went off and did Superman instead.
Which is his dream project.
But the very interesting thing, I think, is Kinberg, the screenwriter, also wrote X-Men: The Last Stand. So he's the one that did all this stuff in the first place.
Yeah, blame him.
It's him undoing his own work.
Yeah.
Effectively.
Basically, it's Tipex. That's the whole film is just basically Tipex. So, Ian, they don't bother us too much, and I think a lot of them you can kind of just go with because they didn't have all this planned out a la Marvel. So it's going to have some inconsistencies because you've got so many people collaborating on them. Another one, I did actually think of this one. This is from Justin Sales. So, as awesome as Quicksilver kitchen scene is, why is Time in a Bottle by Jim Croce playing so fast? I understand it's really dorky, but are we to understand that he speeds up the track on his Walkman to match his super speed? I don't believe the technology of the time could handle this. Also the same thing about Pong.
Just grow up and move on. Yeah, it doesn't matter.
I didn't think that.
You and sorry, I would say it to Justin because Justin's a loyal viewer. But who gives a toss? It's a cool song.
But
the
magnetic tape wouldn't have the tensile strength to play at that speed.
It's a cool song. There was I saw a big debate on Twitter as to what model of Walkman they had out in the year that the film came out and what he's actually using. Well, they didn't have a Sony Walkman. I think it might have a Sony Walkman, but there was I
can't suspend my disbelief.
I don't care, and it's a really cool scene.
I can get along with the woman transforming, but if they have the wrong model of Walkman, they can sod off. Anyway, the ending. We keep talking and gesturing towards the ending.
Yeah, so Emil Lang says, sends us a question. Did they really just make almost every X-Men movie non-canon?
Yeah, and Andy Harrison wrote in to say, did X-Men 1 to 3 ever happen now?
Yeah. No.
And yes.
Yes and no. Equally, the Wolverine films didn't happen. Or they
did happen, but they happened now in a parallel universe.
They did. And equally...
in a very comics way of doing things as well.
All the similar events might have happened on this timeline, just with a different outcome at the end of it. So... a lot of what we saw could have happened. Just the characters that we meet at the end of X-Men: Days of Future Past aren't dead, and so they weren't killed when these events happened.
It could have been the resolution. The Dark Phoenix saga, for instance, could have consolidated in a different way.
Yeah.
So
it's Star Trek, though, isn't it? It's what happened with Star Trek.
It's
universe.
a canonical reboot.
Yeah.
So it's not saying everything you love didn't exist. Of course not. Those films are still there, but in a very comics way, in a very sci-fi way, we're now kind of unchained from that continuity, unshackled from it, and you can go do whatever you want now. And you don't and some of the inconsistencies that this film kind of generated probably won't exist going forward because they'll be more organised and they don't have the burden of those films on them anymore.
Yeah, you like to think that now, having seen the example of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that this is going to be, that Kinberg and Singer and whoever else is involved are really going to plan these movies pretty far in advance.
Yeah, so James Walker said, do you think, maybe this is too loaded a question, do you think Bryan Singer did this because he was unhappy with Last Stand?
I don't know how. Like I said, I don't know how unhappy he can be when he was involved with the movie. It didn't turn out great, and I think for the fans' sake, I think they've done a really cool thing. Like,
it's a really nice.
I wondered if people were going to be annoyed because I saw it quite early, and I couldn't speak to you until you'd seen it. But the fear was that people would be peed off having seen characters they love die and grieve for them, to just have that slate wiped clean. People, that you run the risk of people being peed off, but actually, it's how I felt. It's really awesome to see these characters back.
So it's like you said, peed off. I
was going to say something rude, but I didn't want to swear on the superhero show. Superman wouldn't swear. And actually, it was really cool to see them back together, interacting with each other. I didn't feel annoyed with it.
I don't feel cheated. I almost feel like there's a sense of nostalgic relief, and you're just like, yes.
Particularly Scott and Jean. I mean, that was really like a really cool moment. That I felt myself getting a lump in my throat.
Yeah, that was It's just like, oh, it's the X-Men, they're back. And even if they don't ever use them again, still, I don't know, it gives me a little bit of a warm fuzzy feeling having them all back together again.
Yeah.
And everything worked out for them, because everything was going really horribly wrong. So, where do we go from here? This is the next section.
Well, we get Brett Ratner in to direct the next one. I think that's the first thing you do.
So... bring him back. He's got some good ideas. Jeff is incredibly optimistic. He says, I wanted to write in. Do you think the franchise is being brought back to the glory days? I was relieved just how good it was. So what are the glory days? I guess it's X-Men 2. I don't think X-Men is all that good.
No, and we really like First Class. Yeah. I think that was a return.
I think it's been an uneven series, but what this is really... I don't know, you can see them being X-Men movies for the next 10 years.
Well, I think it's, in my opinion, it's one bad film in 5 if you're just sticking to the strict X-Men movies.
Yeah.
I mean, Iron Man, as far as I'm concerned, had one bad movie in 3, so this is already a better batting average.
Yeah.
So I guess it's a continuation of the glory days, would be my opinion.
So... future storylines. We know they're doing Apocalypse.
Yeah.
So we've got Dante, great name, has written in. He says, what can they do from going from here on? Can they redo the Phoenix Saga? So they've done a famous storyline with Days of Future Past. Obviously, they tackled the Dark Phoenix Saga with The Last Stand very hurriedly. Kind of reminds me of what they did in Spider-Man 3 with the Venom storyline. You just kind of, it's a fan favourite.
Yeah.
Let's just do it because we can.
Yeah, very much so.
But at the same time... do we want to go back?
I don't think so.
Because I feel like I don't want to see Jean doing that. I want them to pass the torch.
There are so many great stories to tell in the X-Men universe. Stories that are in the comics of the past, stories that these guys have come up with in the future. I don't think we need to retread.
Yeah.
So I would say no on that specific one.
I think Days of Future Past shows that, like, even though it's a very famous storyline, it's only 2 issues of a comic, and there's not much to it. It's a great premise, and they adapt it a lot in this movie. And I think there could be so many other stories that they heavily adapt. And I'm sure that's what they're going to do with Apocalypse.
Yeah, and if they choose to continue with Jean Grey, then they could do something really cool with that character that isn't Dark Phoenix, They could go to dark places without having to tell exactly the same story.
Definitely. So some of the feedback we got in was about Kitty Pryde being given the powers and how that's inconsistent with the comics, because in the comics it's she sends herself back in time, not Wolverine. But obviously, financial reason, Hugh Jackman's a much bigger bankable star than Ellen Page. That's why he's the main character, really. But who's going to be the heart and soul of the X-Men franchise going forward? Tony says, what do you think about Mystique being pushed to the foreground of the X-Men universe and her power being the basis for the end of the movie mutant race? Like, she's obviously a big star, Jennifer Lawrence, and it feels like
huge star,
positioning her quite,
if not the biggest star in the film, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, equally, it didn't. I mean, if you think too hard about what's going through her mind in the movie, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Yeah. She's being totally unreasonable.
So it still seems Wolverine is it? Who's the next one? Is it maybe Channing Tatum?
Yeah, well, that's the word in the street, is that potentially, maybe not on the next one, but introducing him as a way to replace Wolverine as the central character.
I feel like they need to introduce those new ways, establish them. He's obviously a big star. Because you need someone who can carry that franchise, and Hugh Jackman's done that so brilliantly for 7 films. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many more he has. I think he's got a couple more in him.
I'm really happy with McAvoy and Fassbender though. I don't think it needed, and for me, First Class worked without having Wolverine in.
Yeah, I think McAvoy is my favourite thing in the film. Actually,
yeah, you're a fan of his, weren't you?
I think he's brilliant. Right, what about Cyclops? Some love for Cyclops from both Therese and Fraser Clift. What do you think about Cyclops coming back at the end? Do you think Cyclops will be used more effectively as leader of the X-Men rather than the jealous boyfriend?
Why don't you take this one?
Well, I don't think we're going to get Cyclops back, really. I think it's a cameo. Yeah. I think as nice as it was to see him, and you want on the big screen another shot of that character. Yeah. Because Cyclops is the leader of the X-Men, and he was completely passed over in those movies for Wolverine. He was super lame. He was the lame boyfriend in the background, rather than the tactical genius that he is. Yeah. But I don't think we're going to get another shot at Cyclops, unless they can somehow bring in a younger version, much younger version. Say, after Apocalypse, they do one set in the early 90s. I just don't think we're going to have the Cyclops that we want on the big screen.
So do you think Apocalypse is going to be the young first-class cast? Full stop?
I think it is, yeah. Yeah. I think it's going to be McAvoy, Fassbender in some capacity, in possibly late 80s, with some new additions.
So no Kelsey Grammer?
No Kelsey Grammer.
Well, this is quite a dark note to end the video show on, but...
Yeah. So if you want to see a world without Kelsey Grammer, please let us know at IGN... Yeah. _ UK feedback at IGN.com.
Yeah, no, but let us know what you think, because it'll be interesting to see where they go with this.
Yeah. What ideas do you have? Let us know. And until then, we'll see you later.
Yeah, cheerio.